Hey everyone, welcome back to the First Class Lacrosse podcast. I'm Deemer Class and I'm joined by my co-host Matt Dunn. It's already mid-March. The college seasons are 5 to 6 weeks in. We just wrapped up our winter training and all the high schools are finally underway. Matt, excited to get into it here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Deemer. Yeah, I think a good starting point for us here is kind of level setting where we're at in the year. And I know you mentioned the college season. I just want to take a second to kind of set into where we are as a business because Deemer and I were so entrenched in this, but I think it's interesting just to note kind of like what in particular you've been up to the last few months. Maybe everybody doesn't know, but for the last 4 or 5 years, from September through December, and then again January through March, you've essentially been going to Baltimore every Tuesday night for training, Westchester Wednesday nights for training, Long Island Thursday nights for training, Boston some Monday nights for trainings, and then occasionally on weekends you're traveling for, clinics or team trainings. I know you were in Chicago area this past weekend for a Lake Forest clinic. And this is the last week of winter training for you. How nice does it feel to about to be done the circuit of train rides up and down the East Coast for the next few months?
It feels great. It feels great. I finished 2 sessions this week and have our last one coming up, and definitely feel some relief. It's been a long winter, but it's been awesome. And it was funny. One of the families the other day asked me where I live, and I was like, "Oh, I'm down in New York City. I'm downtown," as if it's so obvious. And she's like, "Oh, we were all talking, just curious. We didn't know if you lived in Baltimore or New York or where you were." And it was funny because when my wife moved from California to New York and I left USC and moved back to New York, I was living in Baltimore for about 2 years. That's where I was coaching with St. Paul's. But part of my, desire to keep our relationship going and see her more was also coupled with these every other week trips up to New York where I train up to New York, do a training session, come back into the city, see her. And I did that for a year and a half, and that kind of got things going up in this area. And so now I've still done that on the reverse side. But yeah, I don't think people always realize how much consistent in market training that we're doing. And, in some cases is, 20 to 25 weeks this year, which is exciting.
I know this wasn't the intention because we just went through the outline of the podcast 5 minutes ago, but I do think it would actually be interesting. I don't know how many people that listen kind of know your story from graduating college to now. And I think it'll be interesting to hear the 1 to 2 minute version of your journey because you have kind of had a lot of pit stops along the way and we hit them at points. But I think just even you talking about, you being in California for a few years, coming back to Baltimore, ending up in New York. Why don't you run us through just graduating college to now, where has your location and energy been spent?
Yeah, I 2016 graduated, started full time in New York City in sales and trading the summer of 2016, and was a great start. I was still trying to play professionally, and did a full year there. Wanted to make this change to get back into lacrosse full time. So in summer of 2017, I moved back to Baltimore. In that year, did clinics in 40 cities and went to over 20 different states between playing and coaching. And then right at the end of that full year, I was about to, do it all over again. And I got the opportunity to go move out to California to coach at USC. So moved to LA. Why did I do that? I wanted to get into the women's game. I wanted to try a new city. LA seemed amazing, which it was. And I was there for 3.5 years, before and during and after COVID. And then, like I said, moved back to Baltimore, year and a half or 2 years, move up to New York City. I've been here for over 3 years. So it's been awesome. I feel like I've gotten to experience a lot of great parts of the country, and getting to do and help build FCL along the way has been really special. So I've just met a lot of great people and families, and I think back to this advice Coach Danowski always gave, where he was like so focused on us being present and in the moment, where a lot of us were so focused on getting these internships, which I got, and it was again a really tough process. But I just feel like as I get farther and farther removed, like the element or essence of what he was trying to say was also like, hey, it's going to work out. Like you're going to figure this thing out over time. As long as you're like doing a really good job and, giving your effort and like working through things along the way. And I think that's proven true so far. So, it's been a fun journey.
You met your wife in California. She moved back to New York for a job, which kind of brought you back east. Prior to going to California, you were an assistant at McDonough, correct? For a
Yeah.
year.
1 year with Coach Hillgartner
Gardner.
on the men's side.
You went to USC. You coached Division I women's lacrosse for 3 years, correct? At USC. You came back. You were first class full time, and then you've helped with the St. Paul's women's team here for 2 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, we finished number 1 in the country and number 3 in the country. So two exciting years, and a lot of great girls that are playing in college now, and great people to be around.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I even forget this sometimes. Like your coaching resume of men's high school, women's college lacrosse, women's high school, and then obviously all of the trainings we've done, the events we've done, and it's just cool to see those perspectives merge. Kind of looping back to where we are now, we've been running these weekly trainings now for 6 years, maybe in the fall and winters. Curious to how this last group, as you wrap up this 2026 winter, what's different in your approach? Is there anything different you noticed in the athletes? Is there anything just that you think has changed or evolved or has stayed the same over the last, 5 or 6 years of the trainings you've been running?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I definitely feel and notice the schedules and how busy the kids are, like even more than when we started. Like I just, between whether it's multiple lacrosse obligations or other things, like they're just doing like so much and trying to like fit it in. And so it's just more like interesting to observe. I feel like, you know, there's a lot of things that are similar, where like you get some kids that are super curious and like ask those questions and bring energy. And then I think you get some that, hey, maybe they're just kind of doing it. Their friends are doing it. Maybe they want to be with their friends, or maybe they get signed up for things, and they're just doing a lot of it. So it can kind of feel like they're in that like grind or cycle too, So I'm always just trying to observe those things. And but in terms of like what we're doing, like we still have a lot of the core skill work that we've done in the past, but definitely have tried to weave in a lot more of the constraints led approach that we've been talking about into our trainings, and just try to make it more dynamic, like drive that engagement, because I think again sometimes like when they're going from thing to thing to thing, like you don't always feel like they're there, like it's almost like I don't want it to feel like school, but it just might feel like school to them because they're going to like 4 classes a week, in practice, and they're getting coached at all the time. And, it's hard it's like, hey, we want it to be fun, but I don't know if that's always fun, and maybe that's fine, but it's just kind of what I've been observing.
I've noticed that challenge too in trainings of where it feels like everybody's running from one thing to the next and you're just the block on the schedule at times. And there is a challenge to make it feel like, hey, I know you're in school all day. I know you're going to another practice, you have other practices and you're so used to this. How do we shake off the cobwebs for these next, 45 to 60 minutes here? And just take our brain out of like the routine of, oh, go to this, do this. All right, on to the next one. You were at Lake Forest this past weekend, and you and Tim Muller were there running a training. Um, You mentioned the group was extremely coachable. Some feedback you had, I think you guys enjoyed it a lot. What was that? What does it mean that they were coachable? Can you describe like that experience a bit?
It was awesome. We had a great weekend there. They had just finished up their first week of tryouts, getting into week 2, and we got 2 sessions with the varsity and, 2 youth sessions. And there were just a couple of things that stuck out. It was very refreshing because one of the challenges I found is like we can talk about picks and we do a lot of these things in our weekly sessions. But if again, to the point of if you're a block on the schedule and you're not always like absorbing that information as a player, you can feel like you're starting from square one, like over and over and over, whether it's like you've been doing a similar drill and you're re-explaining the same thing, or hey, here are the 3 most core principles of this drill that we're trying to do, and the objective and the why, and you explain all those things. But every time you do a pick related drill, you're like back to square one. It's like a challenge, like slipping a pick. It's like one of the most basic things to pick play, but it's hard. Like it's a lot of players like struggle to feel that. Well, when I think of being coachable, I told the coaching staff during the second day that I was so impressed with the group and how when we gave some feedback points, whether it was Tim on the D side or myself on the offensive side, these guys tried to put it into action as fast as possible. And it wasn't about achieving the success on the outcome. It was just the process of they were trying to use a fake or they were backpedaling and dragging. And the things that we've identified as, hey, like this is going to lead to more success in the drill, or when we implemented the gold medal shooting, like they were on it. Like they were trying to do the things that we were talking about. And it was just really refreshing because it started to click faster. And I was like, oh, like that again sounds so obvious. But when you try to implement the things that you're being coached and then you have success or you don't, but then you're grasping it, that's progress. And I think that's what being coachable is all about.
That is one of the in my experience as a coach, but also as a player, as I think about teammates, that's one of the common themes I've seen in all of the players that have continued to have success and evolve at the current level, but also now with some data in the next level and where they go, or a long career professionally, or being a pretty good recruit but getting better in college, or being a good sophomore in high school but being a better junior and senior, is it, and I think it's a skill. Like people think of skills as a lot of times like catching and throwing and shooting technique and your ability to change direction or footwork and whatnot. But a skill is being able to take something, internalize it, remember it, and then try to apply it as a process over and over again. And that might be the next day. And it's like some guys and some players, it's you tell them something, it kind of feels like you heard it, but the next day it's totally gone. And I do think it's a skill that can be trained. And quickly, one thought there is like using a notebook, writing, getting in a habit of writing down the things you're struggling with, and at night before you go to bed and in the morning or the next day before practice, just look at the 3 things that you want to do better that day. And that'll start to train the habit of like, can I take advice and apply it?
I love that. And I'm going to touch a little bit on that later when we talk about David Epstein, the author of Range, and the idea of like explicit reflection. But one thing I do want to say with that as well as we close this loop here. Again, another thing that impressed me so much, there was a couple kids shooting after the session on day 1, like 2 or 3. And then same thing on day 2. And also day 1, they had a morning practice. So they had a morning practice. Then they had the training session with us. Like, who's the first guy starting to take shots? Emmett Lee going to Cornell. Like 2027, first time I've met him, was so impressed. Who's the one kid each day that asked questions after the session? Emmett Lee. He had a question on a hang up. He had a question on some dodging. And I'm like, this is every coach's dream of like having one of your best players be the most curious and the one that you don't have to tell to take extra shots, or it's like his third thing that day. and he's out there grinding, and so really cool to see. I'm excited to follow the team along, and again, just the coaches there, Coach Dave Hone, Nate Kane, they've clearly built a culture. I think Dave's been there for 16 years now of being curious, taking feedback, getting better, and we'll see how they do this spring. But awesome experience this weekend.
I think it's so cool when you hear, you went there and you could get a sense of the culture of the program. I think that's a huge testament to what the people that have been there for a while have built. Is that you can without them telling you what the culture is, you went and you're like, I got a feel for what's important at this program based off how the coaches acted to you and how professional they were, as well as how the players generally seem to, approach the trainings and the opportunity.
Matt, you want to give us a quick update on Highland Park and how the season's going?
Sure. Super brief here. We are I think we're officially at the halfway point in the season. We had a game against St. Mark's last night, a Dallas rival, a local team. We are 8-1. We've lost to Culver 12-7, a really good Culver team. And we're heading to spring break next week, which is in a trilogy event in Naples, Florida, which we're really excited about. I've mentioned it before, but I don't work at the school. So the spring break trip is a really cool chance just to get to be with the guys for an extended period of time. We use it a lot. Like Coach Pressler does an amazing job of like mapping out the season. And we talk about what we want in before spring break from some basics. And then we have a big spring break list where it's like, okay, after spring break, we need these things in as we kind of think about the second half of the season. So it's a great way for us to play some, out of state competition. We treat each game seriously, but we look at it more as less about wins and losses and more about like, can we get better by playing some really good teams here? Maybe try some new things, maybe put some guys in different spots where we want to see like, hey, can we get something out of this guy here and try some stuff? And then the idea is we come back on the second half of the season and try to reinvent ourselves a little bit and get to final form. The season's been awesome. We've been blessed here with great weather. We got a great group that I love coaching, and I'm trying to, like every year, figure it out a little bit. And we got a new crop of guys and just see if I can get the best of them and keep evolving myself here. But we're in a good spot, and I'm really excited for the spring break trip this week.
Yeah, awesome. Well, I'm wishing you the best on that and excited to keep following along.
Appreciate it. I know one thing we wanted to hit here. We had our most recent podcast. Jesse Bernhardt came on. I really enjoyed the episode. I love talking to Jesse. He's been a good friend of ours, an old teammate of mine. And I feel like I just learned so much from him every time I talk with him. And like a lot of the coaches we've been lucky enough to have on, he's just such a professional, clearly, takes his job very seriously, comes from a coaching family, talked about his dad a lot. Deemer, I know you jotted down some thoughts, and I tend to agree with them. The two things that stood out, one was his talking point in developing bench players and making sure that the guys that don't get as much love in practice, he still has a plan for them. And the other was kind of talking about his dad gift of being transparent with players and being direct. And I think he made a point of like, in an age today where some of that gets lost and people don't always hear that, like people really appreciate hearing direct feedback. I was wondering like what your thoughts were on the episode and maybe those points, if anything stood out in particular.
Yeah, it was awesome. And I think, again, even kind of speaking to his dad as well, like, seeing how much like their dad's legacy seems to continue to live on in all of the brothers, as they continue to embark on their coaching journeys, I just think is really special, from an outsider's view. And so even getting to hear him share some of that was awesome. And like, again, like what can you learn? What can you pick up, from people and conversations and people who like, hey, are really treating coaching as this profession, like this lifelong journey. And I think that's special. So, kind of getting into the developing the bench and, transparency with guys, it fascinates me too, because I think lacrosse and recruiting has also evolved now into this new era where, one, it's easier to transfer than ever. When we were in college, coaches had to sign off like your release coaches would have stipulations around, okay, you can't go to a school in conference, but I'll let you go anywhere else. Like all these things that, kind of crazy. Like there's some really talented players that we played with that didn't have the flexibility to transfer. That rule gets changed. So now you really just have to enter the portal, and then you're in there, and then also this whole evolution of NIL, and it's as just keeps trickling into college lacrosse and athletics, obviously. So I think, if you're making all these promises to players in the recruiting process and you're not following through and players don't feel that they're being invested in and don't feel cared for, and maybe you say some things that you like double back on as a coach, like who knows, that like we know that stuff happens all the time. Well, now like you're seeing kids transfer, you're seeing really good players just leave, and everyone's like, "Ooh, why did that person leave? Why did that person leave?" The things, Jesse talks about, like you can say that you're doing these things, but it's evident if you are or not based on like what's actually happening. What are the actions? Like what are the actions that speak louder than words when it comes to investing in those relationships and building those people and building those players. And so, I just thought it was really cool to hear, because again, when you're at top programs, not everyone's going to play. It's extremely competitive, but when guys graduate, are the juniors, are the seniors, do they become your best players? Do they start to fill into roles and make big impacts down the stretch? Or are you always just bringing in like the younger guys, and that might catch up to some teams at times. But I thought that was something that stuck out to me. And he gave a couple practical examples with that. And, I just think that's important for players when they're in college and they're not getting that immediate success right away. Who do they trust to help them get there?
Yeah, and obviously my perspective tends to skew like to a favor of the Maryland guys, but it's just what I know. And I know a lot of the guys that have graduated and that have played at Maryland recently. A lot of guys that came to the PLL, a lot of guys Deemer that has come and worked our events. And so obviously we know Jesse well, I know the program well, but I also hear a lot from the guys that have come through and played for them. And I think the cool thing about what we heard Jesse say on the podcast is it kind of revealed some layers, but I hear the guys come out and the how highly they speak about their experience there, and particularly with like the defenders with Coach Bernhardt is, they have such a reverence because he puts a lot of time into them and he invests a lot into them. And I think they want to give it back. And I think what a lot of them, they came out of that with an experience of professionalism. Like all these guys come to the PLL and they have a notebook they use for PLL scouting, like because that's the way they did it in Maryland. They have we have our team call and they have their notes on like the guys because that's just the habits they developed there. And I even think you see a lot of the guys that, and probably not everybody, but even the guys that don't play as much, they still take that professional manner because that's the culture that's been established. And to your point, like even if you're not getting on the field, you still feel like you're a part of it and you're growing because a coach is saying, "Hey, I know you're the fourth, fifth, sixth defender, but you got to come by next Tuesday and we're going to talk through this stuff because next fall it might be you, or if so and so goes down or whatever." And when the coach starts investing in you like that, I feel like anybody, if somebody's going to give to you, like you kind of feel like you owe them. Like, okay, coach is carving out time, and he clearly made these clips for me, and he's putting in time with me. I should probably do my part. Otherwise, like I'm letting him down, and that's on me. Versus like, oh, coach hasn't said a word to me all spring, other than yelled at me for slashing the starter and the scout rep.
Yeah, and I wonder too, I wonder what the variance is when kids commit now. When kids commit, how much are their positional coaches or coaches reaching out to guys leading up to signing day, or girls? What is that communication like? And you like hear different things, but I think that matters more now. It people can't take it for granted that, oh, you commit as a September of your junior year when you still know nothing. You still know nothing about what you want. and then you don't talk to them for a year, and then you're surprised if they commit somewhere else, like I think this stuff is happening more. And I do think some people tend to lament that, oh, this age of lacrosse and these student athletes, and they shouldn't do this and they shouldn't do that. And at the end of the day, it's like it's a two-sided thing here. People are trying to match off like good fits for the program, good fits for school. And I think those things that, coaches are being intentional about matter more than ever. And, that's kind of the state of where we're at. So I like when we have these conversations, hearing those things that I can say, okay, if I was a college coach or a high school coach, or a club coach, these are things that I would be doing to be more intentional. And even as someone that's doing training, like how can I take more of that to just try to build more of a relationship in that small amount of time?
I'll say, I in my experience with our high school guys, and a handful of them are committed. And so I get a pretty good pulse on what their experience is like with their coaches that they're going to play for. Some of these college coaches are working their butts off. And because I know that because they're keeping regular contact with a junior in high school that's committed there. But you also know that they're doing that with the whole class, probably the seniors as well. And then obviously they're in season coaching their guys. And I've also heard some that really haven't heard from their coaches since they've committed. So I think it's a mixed bag, but I think that the coaches that do it really well, like they're staying on top of it, and these players are hearing from them. And I've heard a number of guys that they might get one or two calls a month, or maybe even more, from their positional coordinator in college, and they're a junior right now, and just, hey, how's the season going? Like, think it like, here's what we're doing right now, like all this stuff, kind of keeping them in the loop. And so I thought that was cool to hear, and have tremendous respect, because I also know that they're in the midst of their spring season with their guys or girls right now, and figuring that out.
The cool thing, Matt, where we like take this lens of recruiting and lacrosse and you try to apply it beyond, who do you regularly hear from in life? Like who just reaches out to you when they don't need something and they're just, hey, just checking in. How you doing? Like ask some questions, give you a call and not just a text, or even if it's just a text, like, it's a consistent thing. Like those amount of people for me are pretty small, and some of it sometimes is like, you know, parents of the first kids we ever trained, and that's really special to me. And I just it's a very interesting thing because as you get older, everyone 10 to 20 years older than us keeps telling me, hey, your circle gets smaller and smaller. But like, it's so, it's awesome when people like make that effort and they're consistent about, that communication. But, again, that's a whole nother topic, but I do think it's always cool to connect the dots of where, being a student athlete, being in athletics translates beyond the field.
Absolutely. Next topic here, kind of, we are a little over a month into the college season, and we're not going to cover this in depth, but we've seen, the first wave of the season, and how the polls have kind of changed, and obviously nothing's totally finalized yet. But we want to talk about this idea of, like, maybe not getting off to the start you hoped for as a team, whether you call it a slump or whatnot. We've seen it with a few teams, right? I think Maryland is one that people from the outside will say, like, hey, they're 2-3 right now. Normally Maryland's not. Like, what's going on? Georgetown, 2-3. UVA on the men's side, 3-3. On the women's side, Boston College, 3-4. Syracuse, 4-3, which is a winning record. But once again, when you're a program with some of these expectations, like, having 3 losses early is maybe not what you hope for. UVA, 5-4 on the women's side. And so, not trying to say any words about the programs, but there's expectations about these really high caliber programs. And a lot of times, if you don't start off, 4-1, everybody's like, what's going on here? And Deemer, my question for you is, what's it been like? One, have you been on a team? Do you remember times where you've been on a team that has been going through these periods? And what's it like in the locker room?
And I was talking about this over the weekend because this kind of topic came up at the end of the session with Lake Forest. But I told him about 2013 where we started the season 2-4. And we had losses to Denver. You guys came to Duke and dominated us. We had a loss to Notre Dame. And we're sitting there looking at the schedule like if we lose one more game, our chances of, making the tournament are going to be very slim. And I just think back to most teams I've been on, we've always had this moment of your back is against the wall and you are really forced to have a very critical amount of individual, unit, and team self-reflection. Like you have to really dig in and be so honest with yourself that you're like questioning almost everything because you're just trying to find the answer of what do you need to change and fix that is going to help set this thing back on the right track. And I always come back to this idea of how people talk about mental health in sports. And I'm just like, man, there is not much balance when you are trying to be an elite team or elite player. Like you were so ingrained, like you are in this thing and it is so intertwined with your identity that maybe there's better solutions out there, but like when I was going through it, man, like those losses cut deep. Those times where I went, oh for whatever shooting and a couple turnovers, I felt like I was letting everyone down and myself down, and it stings. But all you can do is get back to work. All you can do is like really turn over those stones. And I mean, it's challenging when you're in these slumps and everyone's looking at you.
I think your point of balance makes a lot of sense. I don't know that and it does exist. You hear a lot of high performers say that. I think it depends what you want, but to the point of those experiences, I remember them too, and they really suck while you're in them. Like, and I kind of think they suck. And everybody wants all the time, like like as a player, as a young player, you want every moment to feel good because you don't have perspective. You're in it. I think a lot of coaches have perspective to know that like not every moment's going to feel good. And when you're in it, you're saying this is just in the valley of our journey. This is like one of the valleys, right? A little bit of perspective. It's easy to do that when you're not the one there because when you're there, here's what it's like. You lose on Saturday. You go to film, you get the locker room talk after on Saturday. You leave Saturday night, everybody's like, what the heck? Sunday, you're like, what the heck? Monday's coming. Monday, you show up to the first meeting, like you got to watch the film of the game. Coach is telling you that, hey, nobody's job's safe. Like we have no leadership on this team. Well, like whatever it is, like paint the example a million different ways. But basically, if the ship's going in the wrong direction, you gotta fix it. And a lot of times fixing it isn't fun or easy. And it involves some confrontation and it involves some change and it involves some direct feedback and hard truth. And so it sucks. But what I will say about those is you learn a lot from those experiences. And while I never liked being in them one time, I am very glad they all happened when I think back on them. Because when you have enough of them, you get some perspective. And now you're like, every challenge is new, but I've been through challenges before. And I've been on a team that's really been in dark places and not fun for weeks at a time, for months at a time. And we got through it. And you kind of think about the path you took to get through it. So what I'll say is anybody going through that moment right now, if you're able to zoom out and get some perspective and understand that like, the obstacle is the way thing, like you're going to learn so much by how you navigate it. And also it'll benefit you in the future.
Yeah, I also think like if you're a player too, you don't have to put on this like phony hat of saying, guys, like this is awesome. Like like these things to like not rationalize, but just try to get everyone through and like be super overly positive. It's just more like you gotta embrace it, you gotta lean into it, and you just gotta work. Like you have to commit to that process of pushing through. And You don't have to sugarcoat it. You don't have to try to like make it feel better than it is. Like it does suck. And but you have to self-reflect. Like you have to let that stuff come in. And I think it starts with personal accountability, Matt. Like you cannot be the finger pointer and you cannot let your parents, because I just think this stuff happens all the time, point the fingers in your private conversations to other people on the team and to the coaches. I think it's one of the most toxic, counterproductive things that happens. And I think at some point, like if you're a player, you're going to have to push back on mom and dad and you're going to have to say, "Hey, like that's not what we're doing. Like that's not what this is about." It starts here. And I think that's hard to do, and I'm not saying that all parents are doing that, but I think it's very common. And that's why, like, I think that's why parents get a bad rap with coaches, and there's always like this tension of like parent coaches, and there's no communication, which is fine. But I would just say, like, that I've been there. Like, I've been there with, my parents, like, hey, mom, no, like that's not what it is. That's not what we're doing. You don't know our offense. Like, you just don't, and like, in my sometimes my dad's like total opposite, where he's just like, no, like you can't point that at others. Like you gotta be better, gotta get back to work. And it's like that's all you can do.
It makes me laugh because I'm thinking about one of my good friends now. He's my age, a year or two younger, and he jokes. He was like, "When I played basketball, I made varsity, and I was the 14th guy on the team. Never stepped on the court. And my dad would always be like, 'I can't believe you're not playing all this stuff.'" And like he was like, "There's no way I should have been playing." I joked around in practice all the time. Like my dad didn't know that. Like, but he would always tell me. And so we joke about it now. It's like I shouldn't even been on the team. But that was like that was like the conversation then, and he remembers it. And we all know that happens. But I do agree with you. And I think I personally can relate to this because I'm still playing. And by the way, a challenge in professional lacrosse is to maintain alignment between all the players and the coaches because a lot of the players on the team are coaches. But we have to understand our roles and the dynamics. And I don't think that changes professionally. I don't think that changes collegiately. I don't think it changes at the high school or lower level where when things get hard, the very worst thing that can happen is dissension, where players think the coaches are wrong or unfair and they start to do things their own way because somebody else is telling them this and that. And it's not about figuring out who's right, right? It's not about is the coach right or not. And I say this, obviously, Deemer, you and I coach and have coached, so we have bios on that side. But I also say this, like I've learned this and I'm practicing as a player, where it's not about who's right. It's about alignment and understanding roles and hierarchy. Coach is the coach. And when the coach kind of says something, buy in. When you're going through a hard time, buy in is the key. And if you buy in, the coach's job is to keep steering the ship. The player's job is to buy in and to follow the coach and to lead and be accountable to that amongst themselves. And so I've just seen it so many times, and it exists in the pro league. Like I see it in locker rooms where players think they know better than the coaches. And once again, it's not about knowing better; it's about being on the same page. It's a real challenge at the pro level. It really is. It truly is. Ask anybody. The teams that do the best, they choose to buy in to the coaches, even if they disagree, because it gets everybody on the same page, and then you can collectively move in one direction. So I would say like it's less about trying to figure out what's right or optimal. Let the coaches do their jobs. And then it's more about buying in and doing the very best to follow and fulfill that. And when you form that two-way relationship where coach says this, players do this, then coach will say, oh, X isn't working. We're going to do Y now. But then they know players will do Y with them. And so you have now this foundational system in place where you can actually make progress. And it's really tempting to want to say, this is dumb. Coach is an idiot. He doesn't know this. Like player Y is doing this. Like it's so easy to do that. The hard thing is to buy in, stay together. But at least in my experiences so far, anytime dissension happens and connection breaks, you're losing all hope of getting back on track.
And that's probably where, again, back to that trust piece we were talking earlier with Jesse, like I do feel like, if someone comes to me with that problem, it's really hard to rebuild that or even like advise like what should you do because you're not seeing like that side of it, and I think those conversations come up a lot. So I mean, it's a challenge. I love the thoughts and perspective and definitely agree. And there's so many sides to these stories too. And I think that's why at the end of the year, you get a couple teams that are peaking and performing at high level and winning and overcoming that stuff. And you get more often than not, a lot of teams that don't. And then the cycle continues and it turns into the next season. So that's, it's always the nice finality to the season and cool to see different teams like, bounce back after a poor year the year before. And I noticed that, saw a headline too about how Miami basketball, like the coach who came from Duke, he's 37 years old, was an assistant for Shire. They went from 24 losses last year to 24 wins so far this year. And, just cool to see people year over year make those big changes and even what, Signetti's done with Indiana football. Well, Matt, let's move on here. One thing that I wanted to bring to the podcast today was this concept of trainability, but zooming out, there's been a podcast that you and I have definitely followed probably pretty close to inception, by Greg Olson, and Youth Inc. He's done an awesome job getting some high profile guest speakers, you name it. And one of my old teammates sent me one of his most recent podcasts with the author of Range, David Epstein. And I actually read this book 3 or 4 years ago, and it was awesome. And I believe maybe the title or like the subtitle of Range, Matt, is it's like how generalists thrive in like a specialist society. Like I'm butchering it,
Yeah,
but
it's something I remember. Yeah, something like that.
something along those lines, right? And so a lot of this podcast kind of started diving in on nature versus nurture and like some of those topics. And I just think it's really relevant to some of the stuff we're talking about. And one of the things that he said that I'd love to hear your take on, no two people respond to identical training the same way. And he, related to differences in their psychology, physiology, sociology, all these things. And that trainability, he thinks, is the most important kind of talent. And it doesn't always show up right away. It happens at different times, different timelines, like age matters. And it kind of talks around the idea of like nature versus nurture. Do you have any thoughts on that or anything that you've kind of seen in your experiences? Because I think that this topic continues to be super prevalent with, reclassing and early specialization, and in the lacrosse world.
Yeah, well, I think at a high level, like I 100% agree, and I think it's super obvious that it's true, right? Like, and what I mean by that is, like, just think of a classroom. Like, we all went to school. One kid, the same teacher teaching the same stuff, and one kid is dialed on it, gets everything, retains it all, sees the whiteboard, got it, no problem. And then one kid has no idea what's going on. And then maybe they learn a different way and can figure it out. And it's not that they can't figure out the problem. It's that their ability to take in and learn through different formats is different. They're two different people. I think there's a lot that points, without me being, a scientist here, I think there's a lot that points to just, uh, you know, natural predisposition to, what you're born with. But I think there's a lot that's trainable. And I think separating coaching from teaching is a mistake. It's all learning in different domains, right? Like telling me learning math is really no different than learning some of the concepts you're going to do on a lacrosse field. Now, executing them is a different story, but this idea of taking information, understanding it, processing it, and being able to figure out a way to execute it, I imagine follows a very similar path. So I do think people are different. I think that's the art of great coaching also, is not just being like, I think anybody that's really got deep into coaching, has studied great coaches, understands that they don't just have the perfect playbook and can run it every year. They have a deep understanding of what they want to be and who they currently are, and their skill is the ability to get there. And it doesn't look the same if you always know point A is your team and point B is where you want to get them to. The magic is how you get from point A to point B, and that might change every year with every group, and it might be different by guys.
Yeah, and it's even now, like when we're talking a lot about the modern game on offense and what coaches are running and schemes, it's changing year to year based on their personnel. And I think we need to take that same mindset as it comes to training too, because again, like training to train, what's the point of that? Like training's not this fun thing. Like we're not just showing up to train. Like we have an outcome in mind. We want to get better at our sport. So why would you want to train all these things that when you find out that they have less relevance to you achieving your goals or helping you specifically achieve your goals? It's like, that kind of sucks. Like that was a waste of time. And I think that that is a really important lens to continue to think about. I also think, like, you mentioned some things too, where having these athletes have the ability to solve problems on the field is massive. And, something that he talks about in this podcast and also his book is the idea of sampling. And that is one of the core reasons why everyone's recommending so much playing multiple sports. When you have a larger sample size, when you've tried different things, you've come up with different solutions to problems because you've also been faced with different problems. And so, one of my favorite things is the no look pass. I didn't learn the no look pass from lacrosse. I learned it from basketball. And that just was something that you kind of did and you learned to do. And then I apply that to lacrosse. What I think also, again, like trying to figure out, hey, how can I do this multiple sport thing? Look, you can get so much from these other sports, even if they're not AAU, even if they're not club.
100%.
It's like, and again, the rec leagues are dying. That's a problem. We're not going to solve that problem on this podcast today. But go be that JV basketball player. Go do these other things. Get that additional sample size where you're learning to solve problems on the fly and think faster and read and react. And that's what we need to keep developing here.
I've like toyed around, and maybe I've talked to you about it, of this, like, almost like Sims world creation. You remember the Sims, like where you can make a fake whatever family person, etc. Of like, if you were going to make a player that was going to get recruited to Division 1, like what would you have them do from, like, I don't know, age 6? And it's in a way a terrible exercise, because it's like this, I don't believe in this total like trying to prescribe optimization. But I think if you reverse engineer a lot of people that got there, here's probably what it looks like. Kid grows up loving playing sports in their backyard with friends. They love playing everything. They want to do all this stuff. At some point, they start migrating towards a particular sport. Probably by the time they're 11 or 12, they're the better player on most of their teams, no matter what the sport is, like whether it's soccer, football, lacrosse, baseball, basketball. They just tend to be one of the better athletes there, and they love practicing on their own. So they just go outside and they shoot hoops on their driveway. They throw the ball against the wall. They'll play capture the flag with their friends, whatever. And then that player, as they get into high school, continues to migrate more towards that particular sport. And they decide that one sport, for one reason or another, is one they want to spend more time doing. So when it's basketball season, they still go out on Saturday and shoot lacrosse balls because they just like that sport that much more, but they still like basketball and they're trying to get better at it. As they get to that high school age, they are also layering in a very strong strength and conditioning program regularly to get stronger, put on weight, build out muscle, and learn some basic mechanics of movement. Now, by the time that player's 16 or 17, they've developed an incredibly robust athletic base of movement literacy. They're able to shuffle. They're able to move backwards, forwards, laterally. They have great spatial awareness. They understand how to manipulate people in space. And they've also developed a foundational, biomechanic system of being able to move weight through space at speed and strength and all of that. Now that player, and I'm saying this is probably a lot of the players that we knew that grew up and did really well at the Division I level. When that player becomes a junior or senior in high school or freshman and sophomore in college, the task for them is to fine tune those skills into shooting mechanics, into, approach stick positioning, into angles on the ball, into understanding tendencies, into continuing to get stronger and faster, into understanding specific concepts for lacrosse. And so now that job becomes to fine tune this robust base that has been built over, call it 14 years of having fun playing multiple sports. And I just believe that that's kind of like what I always knew. And that's just what I believe. I think where people are having trouble now is they're trying to meticulously engineer that where it happens best through a very natural progression.
It makes a lot of sense. It also, Matt, makes me think of where you do really engineer it. Is it was it the Marinovich project?
Yeah, Marinovich, yep.
Where from 4 years old, his dad had him doing all these things. And he got to this prototypical freak and then just burned out, didn't have it. And so there's also the idea that a lot of people that do become the stars later on are the latest bloomers, that are not the ones that are peaking early, and they're trying different things. They're sampling different things. They're, having success, pursuing their interests. I think the challenge is if you are in that later bloomer category, it's probably a real challenge for mom and dad not to want to bridge that gap faster. And I think that's what you'll hear in this podcast and reading this book is maybe there's some affirmation and support that, hey, don't try to bridge it faster. They'll get there on their own time, if they're meant to get there. And if they're doing these different things and they're in these environments, these positive environments, these environments that help them learn and try things and improve at things and find what they really love, they're going to just have a better chance of having success. But I think trying to accelerate that, that leads to that early specialization, that leads to some of that early success. But just more and more research just shows it's not creating the long-term success. And I think we have to keep coming back to, we want the longer term success, not just in sport, but we want it in life too. And these lessons that we're talking about, these life lessons, you learn them through the ups and downs. That's what we were saying with the slumps. If you try to cut that short or you prevent your child from having those slumps, or roadblock some of that stuff, you're cutting them short of stuff that they could be learning for their lifelong benefit.
Yeah, the only thing I'll add there, and maybe it's more of a disclaimer, is I can understand how incredibly challenging that probably is to execute versus a lot of people probably hear this stuff, right? And I think there's a lot of forces against parents too these days where they don't want to mess it up. And there's a keeping up with the Joneses culture. If everybody's doing X and I do Y and it doesn't work, did I mess it up by going against the grain? Or is it just safer to do, even though everybody says doing X, trying to force them to do all these things is not the right thing. At least I mess them up by doing more rather than doing less. And maybe my phrase of mess them up is wrong, but I do think we Deemer, you and I talk to a ton of parents and we understand the nuance of this. It is challenging. I guess if we could give any just perspective, it would be most parents that we work with that have played sports, they generally in their gut have the right instinct and they feel like they're going against it because they need to do something. But at least a lot of the ones I talk to, they're kind of I kind of know this feels a little crazy. This is a little crazy. I'm I think that's a little crazy. I don't know that you need that. They're okay, that's helpful because it seems like everybody's doing it, but it just doesn't feel like something that I ever did growing up or feel like is necessary.
And that's where I think books like this and people that are coming out with research, this is where you can get data to inform your decision. Because it's one thing to go off of your gut and your instinct, but things do change. That's not always correct. And then you have this social pressure, this norm that's coming in, and hey, it's making you feel like the rankings matter. It's making you feel like you got to go to every event. So then what can you do? You can pull some studies, just look up what some of these authors are referencing, and you can see that, hey, they looked at this group of people, they looked at that, and here's what they're finding, and this is what they're sharing with us. And I think that is where you could also try to build some confidence in your decision making, that it's not just going off your gut, but it's data informed as well. It's not the end all, but it allows you to still get more information in this process to say, okay, I'm not just doing less because I feel like doing less. I'm doing less because there's some evidence here that shows that a lot of high performers in the last 20, 30, 40 years, it actually looked like this, even though the media is telling me this. That would be another way I think that, parents could just try to utilize some of these things to keep informing decision making. And then you got to do what's best for you and your family, and I think like no one can probably fully tell you what that is.
Couldn't agree more. Deemer, I want to move here to a topic that I think is a little bit relevant to this, but slightly different in this idea. It's in the realm of long-term development. And it's this idea of letting go is kind of what we're saying as the theme to it. And I've had some conversations with players where this has become relevant. I've noticed it in myself. And the idea really is that as you continue to grow and think about your development long term, which I think is a really healthy thing to do, not just like how good can I be tomorrow or next month, which is important, but how good could I get by next year, by 2 years, by my senior year if I'm a freshman. And the idea is that what got you here won't always get you there. And that is, in a way, saying the best people at having long careers in sports, but I also think business or anything really, are able to reinvent themselves. And here's a lacrosse example to that. It's the recruit that was a ball dominant attackman at Dodger in high school, really good, a top 10, recruit, whatever, gets recruited to a top school. They're not probably going to be a dominant ball carrying attackman in the ACC or Big Ten. So for them to have the same amount of success that they had in high school, they are going to need to reinvent themselves a bit as a player and learn how to play off the ball or to pick, whatever. I had a conversation with a defender I used to coach. He's at the Division I level. He was a top recruit in high school, covered the best Dodger nonstop. His coach goes, "Hey, we need you to be, we have a gap in our off ball play right now. We think you can do it. We need you to be that." He calls me and goes, I think I'm learning it, but like, I've always been an on ball like guy. I've tried to get better off the ball, but like that's never been me. And Deemer, the question is for you, how do you feel about this concept of what got you here won't always get you there? Do you have experience with reinventing yourself, or players that you've seen needing to reinvent themselves to keep going along the way?
Yeah, I think it's very relevant. When I think of it mentally, I also just think of, you have these things that, and I think a lot of it early on can also be external, that, look, if you're blessed as a younger kid to have all this like internal drive that's driving you, great. But I do think, and myself included, and a lot of people also probably have this external drive of, hey, if I'm better at my sport, that might mean more popularity, or that might mean I'm received better, or you name it. Like there's these things, I think this peer influence that like drives that. And then, hey, I might get more recognition, I might get ranked. Like those are all these like external things that go into this drive that, might be causing you to work hard, causing you to put in the extra work. And I think everyone probably hits a point at some level where that is no longer good enough. That fuel is not enough to sustain you. And I remember hitting that point in my career being like, this, like, me getting this, if I got this thing, isn't giving me the same feeling that I got when I was, voted this in college or voted this in high school. And you get to that point where you really have to tap into something different and something deeper internal and say, like, what do you really want? What do I really want out of this? And that's where I think, for me, my experience has been that external motivation does not sustain the fuel that you need over time to get you to your outcomes. And so it has to fall back then on like what really matters to you, what's important. I think what's important changes over the time in your life. And I've also experienced that on the business side of building FCL and kind of coming at the time where my lacrosse career was winding down. So it's a very interesting thing that I can certainly relate to.
This kind of brings me to um, something you and I have talked about. I remember you telling me a while ago you read this book, Open by Andre Agassi, and I was listening to a podcast not long ago, and it got brought up, so I bought the book and I'm reading it, and I sent you this quote, and I want to read it here because I think I read it like 10 times because I related to it so much, and I thought it was so interesting. And the context is in 1994, Andre Agassi, he's kind of this perfect example. His dad was all over him growing up. This tennis prodigy, played all the time. He went to the Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy, which was what IMG became. And he says multiple times throughout the book, like, I hate tennis. He hated it, but it was the only thing he was good at. And he was really good at it. And he felt like he couldn't do anything else. So growing up, he was called a prodigy, all this stuff. He got all these endorsements, but he was underachieving. Like, he hadn't really won anything big. And so he hires this guy, or they're interviewing this guy, Brad Gilbert, who was a kind of savvy tennis veteran, I believe, and to potentially be Andre's coach, where like Andre was his prodigy that was underperforming, and Brad was this guy that I guess they think maybe overachieved what his abilities were. So they're getting dinner with him, and they ask him pretty point blank, and I'm just going to read the passage here. We want to hear what you think about Andre's game. And he goes, you want me to be honest? And they go, please, brutally honest, don't hold back. He essentially gets into this little speech here. He goes, you always try to be perfect, he says. You always fall short, and it messes with your head. Your confidence is shot, and perfectionism is the reason. You try to hit a winner on every ball when just being steady, consistent, meat and potatoes would be enough to win 90% of the time. Quit going for the knockout. Stop swinging for the fences. All you have to be is solid. Singles, doubles, move the chain forward. Stop thinking about yourself and your own game, and remember that the other guy on the other side of the net has weaknesses. Attack his weaknesses. You don't have to be the best in the world every time you go out there. You just have to be better than one guy. Instead of you succeeding, make him fail. Better yet, let him fail. It's all odds and percentages. Get the odds in your favor. Stop trying to be perfect with every shot. You're stacking the odds against yourself. You're assuming too much risk. Be like gravity. When you chase perfection, when you make perfection the ultimate goal, you know what you're doing? You're chasing something that doesn't exist. You're making everyone around you miserable. You're making yourself miserable. Perfection, that's about 5 times a year you wake up perfect. You can't lose to anybody, but it's not those 5 times that make a tennis player or a human being for that matter. It's the other times. It's all in your head. With your talent, if you're 50% game wise, but 95% head wise, you're going to win. But if you're 95% game wise and you're 50% head wise, you're going to lose, lose, lose. And I know that's a little bit long winded, but I read that, and we're just for context, we're talking about a guy as one of the best players in the world, and that perfection mindset got him to be the prodigy that he was, and it took him that far. But he hit a wall that he could not get through, and like his internal state was very much so like, I'm a failure. I can't figure this out. I don't know what's going on. And he credits this and this mindset to a lot of his ability to get to the next level going forward. So I think that, I don't know, like Deemer, I know you and I have talked about this, but Um, to me, that's a great example of one of the best in the world, showing how like fragile we can be internally, and how sometimes that shift in perspective and letting go of what got you somewhere can help you go to the next spot.
And I think when you have a lot of that mentality, like before you can make that switch, I think it starts to show up because it no longer is a fuel, but it's actually a drain. And I think it can become exhausting, and then you're like sitting there like you're fatigued, you're not doing as well, you're not having the success that it once led you to have, and you're forced to adapt, and you're forced to adapt from the mental side, which is where I think everyone also talks about the importance of the mental game to then give you that unlock, that give you that unlock of breaking through. And I feel like I've experienced that too with, the idea of comparison. Like when I first started doing a lot of this, coaching and training stuff, I felt like I was benchmarking myself to certain people and really trying to like compete, be better, be a better coach, do all these things. And it got to a point where it was just exhausting and like my mind could never turn off. And it was also, I think, exhausting for the people that I was sharing that with. And I feel like these last couple of years I've been able to improve a bit, not perfectly, but improve a bit at that to where, yeah, like, that's not what's driving me as much anymore. Like what's truly driving me now and trying to drive us is doing the best we can and trying to create things that have value and meaning, and building relationships and helping these players and families like get to where they want to go, and get the help the coaches be better coaches, now that we're doing more with our coaches community. Like that's becoming like again back to like being the driving light, and it's allowing me to be a little bit above like letting myself get in that muck of comparison, and that stuff's not fueling me as much as it probably used to, and that's kind of personal, but I think it's kind of what we're talking about here.
But I think most high performers probably find an edge somewhere at a young age, and it just works for them, and it's fuel nonetheless, no matter what it is, and it gets you somewhere. And then you really are afraid of losing that edge, and you kinda know that the thing that's getting you there is a little bit toxic, but you're so terrified that if you let go of that, if, like, for Andre's example, like, whatever the perfectionism that Brad Gilbert calls out, Andre doesn't think of it as perfectionism. He just thinks, I have to hit these, I have to do it like this. I have to do it this way because that's all I know. And to have the permission to say, like, wait a second, you just want to win games, right? Or whatever the thing is you want. Your focus on this, like doing it a certain way, is actually distraction from what you want. So let's strip that away and give you permission to say, like, let's get rid of that because you're still really good. You still have the abilities you have. They're not going anywhere. We're changing the fuel here. It's not going anywhere. Anything that's not focused on you getting the outcome you desire is negative distraction. And a list of things that can include that is perfectionism. That is trying to, be better than somebody else. Like, I mean, to your point, Deemer, like, not there's doing the best you can do, and then there's trying to be better than that person. Option B, trying to be better than that person, is a distraction, because who's going to tell you at the end of the day you were anyways? And that's all up for debate. So all you can really do is focus on doing like your very best. And I think whenever I hear or read these things, it's inspiring to me because it helps me reset too. That, am I focused on the best I can do, or am I like getting fueled by these other things? And when I get fueled by those other things, it's really, really draining. Even coaching, like, am I trying to do the best I can do, or am I just trying to like, be better than somebody else is, am I trying to be impressive to somebody, or like be noticed for something? And if it's the latter, it's really toxic and taxing. And I don't do as good of a job.
And I love tying this back to too, like so many of our parent listeners, I'd imagine, and I just know based on a lot of my conversations, so much of this ties into the questions we get around rankings and the questions we get around recruiting. And on one hand, if you were to say that that's the fuel, if you really believe that that was the fuel, you're like handing the rankings to your son or daughter and saying, go beat these guys. Like, let this fuel you, like pin this up on your wall. Like, let's go. If you don't really think that that's good fuel, then we got to do everything we can to help players pull out of that mindset and remove that distraction and bring it back to the stuff that can really fuel them, which tends to be longer term. The rankings are in the moment, and then we got to get back to focusing on the longer term stuff. And it's like, again, how do I get ranked? How do I get seen? How do I get invited? It's like, you know, it's like it's very subjective. This isn't tennis, and I love talking to my wife Maddie about this because she was a top 10 tennis player, played at Northwestern, played in all the tournaments. Tennis is mano y mano. Like Agassi could self-reflect, be like, I'm doing this, and I can go control that outcome. 1 versus 1. You beat that person, you win that tournament, you win multiple tournaments, you are number one. No ifs, ands, or buts. In team sports, it's more subjective. Like you can be really good, but you're really good within that system. Are you really good on your own? Are you going to is your game going to translate to that next team? Like there's so many more variables. You could have the best games, but then you don't win, and then you don't win the tournament. Does that mean you weren't the best player? Like that's how this stuff works. And you have to get like more comfortable with that. And you can't be letting that drive you and not, being a roadblock to high performance.
Final thought on this that ties into another point, some like performance anxiety, et cetera, confidence, is that I think framing this appropriately really helps with your confidence and performance anxiety because it changes your job. And what I mean by that is like probably the healthiest way that I've personally related to as a player of competing is I want to be the best teammate I can be. And I think if you say that, what's that mean? What's that encompass? It means I'm gonna show up ready and prepared every day for my teammates. It means I'm gonna practice hard every day. It means I'm gonna do my best in the games to compete the best. But like my only mandate is to be the best teammate. My mandate as a close defender is not to never let my guy score because that will happen. And right, I played that game too where I can't give up a goal and then like they give up a goal and it's you can't control a lot of that. But I'm gonna be the best teammate I can be. And that means I'm going to, make sure that I'm trying to echo the points that we need to talk about regularly. I'm going to try to lead as I can. I'm going to be great off the ball. I'm going to be good in the clear. I'm going to try to support and encourage my teammates when I feel like they need it. I'm going to try to make sure I keep my guy from scoring because that's part of being a good teammate. But that's not what defines my success here. It's my job is to be the best teammate I can be. And you got to believe on the back end that if you do that, maybe maybe a championship, maybe a great season follows. Maybe some accolades follow. Like if you're an attackman and you do that, like maybe a Tourton follows. I would guess that CJ Kirst was trying to be the best teammate he could be last year. That's the impression I got from him. And he was also the best player in the country. So that's just like, as we talk about this, I've gone through, like you have, like any athlete has and person in competitive field, so many cycles of like trying to figure out your fuel source and how you identify. But when I can anchor that correctly, it's much less pressure to do these things that are unrealistic and a much more fulfilling goal of, hey, I'm focused on this group here and what I can do for you guys.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the interesting part when I hear you say that too, like if you're focusing on being a great teammate, that is regardless of your role. So everyone can have that mindset. And then when you're talking about being a great teammate, whatever your role is assigned on the team or role becomes, being a great teammate is doing everything you can to also let that like fulfill itself. Like you have to do your job. And if your job is the goal scorer, like you need to be locked in to do your job and put the ball in the back of the net. If it's the feeder, if it's the two-way midi, the face-off guy, the defender, like the draw girl, like you not being ready to perform at a high level is because of, you name it. That's not being the best teammate you can be and then fulfilling that responsibility. And so I just like that framing a lot, because you can make the framing around like, I want to score more goals, I want to do this, like, it's like, well, if that's not really your job, like you're kind of missing the boat on what could be that universal goal of being the great teammate, and then the other stuff will follow, and you'll probably not overthink the things that you shouldn't be overthinking.
Yeah, those other things are just, they're fragile, you know. They're less in your control. They're not always the right thing. Um, and I think they're downstream of like this higher level goal of serving the group and the objective of the group.
Awesome. Well, hey, Matt, let's wrap here. Awesome episode. Appreciate everyone tuning in and subscribing to the podcast. Keep us posted with comments, questions. Feel free to shoot us an email at contact@firstclasslax.com if you ever have ideas for guests or feedback on the show. We put out an awesome video last week on simplifying the game of lacrosse down to shot selection. We hope you check it out. We appreciate all the support. We're excited to keep the podcast rolling this spring. Have a great weekend.